it's my privilege to introduce the launch, but that's about all I'm going to do at the moment. So I'm going to hand over to our excellent guest editor, Alexandra, who's going to just introduce the first lot of poets.
Okay, thanks, Roger. Welcome, everyone, and thanks so much for coming along this evening. I'd like to begin by thanking Roger and Mary and Vanessa for inviting me to guest edit issue 11. It was an absolute joy to edit this issue, but it was also extremely challenging. We had hundreds of amazing submissions, and to whittle it down to a final cut of 38 took some doing. So I'd like to thank everybody who submitted to the issue and to congratulate everybody who's participated in issue 11. As somebody who struggles quite a bit myself with writing to prompt and writing to a particular theme, I was absolutely hugely impressed by the scope of the submissions we received and the variety of different themes and different forms and voices in the issue. So in terms of forms, we received poems that were written in couplets. We received different types of contemporary sonnets, quite substantial, chunky prose poems formatted into paragraphs, tiny little poems with 6 or 8 lines, and lengthier poems in free verse and in regular stanzas. This is something I pay a lot of attention to, the relationship between the content of the poem and the form in which it's delivered. And so I was really impressed with all the different forms in issue 11. And I spent hours one Saturday in October curating the issue and sequencing the poems. And I think when you take a look at it, it's a real feast for the eyes as well, with all the different styles that we've received. I was also really impressed by the aesthetics of Julian Bishop's poem, Cafe Caravaggio, which has little coffee beans interspersed between the stanzas. And I thought that was a really lovely creative touch. There are also some really stunning titles to the poems that drew me in. Just to give you a few examples: The Killing Jars, The Pinks I Have Not Lived, The Melancholy Thistle, A Dress So Beautiful It Would Wear You to Death. And from our featured poet, Maria Isakova-Bennett, With its loud, shrill notes, yellow attracted me for a while. Amazing. I think the poems that appealed to me most came at the theme of colours from a really unexpected angle. Or as Mimi Cavalti once put it in a workshop, they came at the poem through the back door. The poems represented a range of different themes, from lepidottery, collecting butterflies and moths, to artists and paintings, illness, grief, abuse, nature, and poems that were rooted in place. It was lovely for me to see a poem about the Baltic flour mill in Newcastle, which has been my home for the last 13 years. And it was also very pleasing to see a poem evoking my second home, Japan, where I lived for 10 years. And the poem Salary Man, with its allusion to a job won in a blue-clad interview, reminded me of the day I met my husband in Japan wearing a navy blue salaryman suit. And salaryman is the Japanese loan word for businessman. Other poems that had a real sort of emotional purchase for me were really tender depictions of the relationship between parents and children. And I also really enjoyed some poems which were looking at the world through a child's eyes. And we're going to hear some of those this evening. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our first 4 poems. And the first person we have up this evening is Chris Spencer, who's got a stunning opening poem to the issue. So Chris Spencer's work has been published in journals in the UK, US, ERA, Europe, Australia, India, and Southeast Asia. His debut collection, Life Drawing, was published in 2022 by Kelsey Books. His second collection, Contact Sheets, is due for publication in early 2024, also by Kelsey Books. So welcome, Chris. Really looking forward to hearing your poem.
Well, thank you very much. It's an absolute joy and a pleasure to be in this fantastic volume. And this is Quince Tree. If you want to see it, the whole universe is contained in a tree. Antonio Lopez Garcia. Antonio Lopez Garcia sketches the quince tree in his courtyard each day of September. He marks the fruits with white stripes. As the branch droops a little lower each day, another line and another. He captures the passing of time. The shadows have light in them, muted yellows and greens. Sometimes he sits by a stuccoed wall in the shade. The space is deep and round. The fruits become heavy with rot and fall. A web of strings surrounds the tree. He places nails in the ground to mark the position of his feet where he stands. There is a metal frame covered in tarpaulin, the center fixed with a hanging weight. His two daughters complain. Poor tree, they say. He sketches the space around, bright as shards of glass. His marks show the way the quince darkens, how its skin has split and lost its bloom. Sometimes the tight branches cast shadows like the grills of a prison. His palette captures the sun through the leaves, clear and somber. It is not the dusk's fading light, nor the milky light of dawn, nor that of a bright afternoon. It is light in action, casting shadows, like children making shapes on a wall. His two daughters help the housekeeper pick the yellow fruit to make membrillo jelly. She sees the rows of guidelines on the skins. It's Papa. He marks everything.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was absolutely beautiful. I loved reading the poem, and it's amazing to hear it in your voice.
It's even better to hear it when our Zoom Ocado delivery just arrived.
Oh,
but,
is that what happened? Oh no.
Adds a little bit of something
Well,
to
I
it.
think you handled it really gracefully anyway. Thanks very
Thank
much.
you.
So I'd like to introduce our next reader now. Our next reader is Deb Catesby. Deb Catesby is a writer and artist living near Hertfordshire. Previously a playwright, since 2020, she has been seduced by poetry. Her poems have been published in the Alchemy Spoon and twice longlisted for the Fish Prize. Her painting, Family Dinner, was shortlisted for the 2023 Royal Academy Summer Show. So please join me in welcoming Deb.
Hi, studio morning after Roger Robinson. And if I speak of painting, I speak of stepping in, break into the reds, corner the greens, yield to the yellows, mix ochre with grey. I speak of the touch of tube, oily sweat of pigment, cold silver, feather of brush, flex, dab, spring. I speak of the easel slotted, propped, balanced, slipped, gripped to order. Stains flavour the air, faint resin of paint, crunch of charcoal, feel of white coat, its poppered wrists. I hum a hymn from childhood, graze the dry canvas with the palm of my hand. the sound of the door behind me. Forgotten, swinging loose.
Thanks so much, Deb.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was really lovely. So the next poet up that I'd like to introduce is Nia Broomhall. I had the pleasure of meeting Nia recently at the Winchester Poetry Festival, so really looking forward to hearing you read again. So to tell you a little bit about Nia Broomhall has just completed an MA in creative writing. She's head of English at a comprehensive school, and she's been teaching for 22 years. She was highly commended in the Winchester Poetry Prize 2022 and was highly commended again this year. She's been published by Magna, Drake, and others. Welcome, Nia.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. This is really, really beautiful. I had another look at it today and it's just so gorgeous. This is Sky, and it's a sonnet about a day at school when I was about 7. My every sky then was a brush blue line across the top of the paper. My skies were far and up away from empty white where things lived, my round clouds, my tick birds high over pointy roofs of houses like mine, green lines for grass and yellow sun that shined and stick people smiles in the big wide Y of world I had no colours for but white. One afternoon, before my picture dried, Mrs. Gadd said, "Look out there, see, the sky goes all the way down." And I looked outside at the willow field, and my wide-eyed find that blew through branches was still the sky. My brush washed my paper with green and blue light. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Nia. That was really lovely. Thanks very much. And so the final person I'd like to introduce in my group of 4 poets is Carol Bromley. Welcome, Carol. It's really nice to see you. So Carol Bromley is a York-based poet. She's had 3 collections with Smith Doorstop and 1 with Valley Press. She's the winner of a number of prizes, including the Bridport and Hamish Canham Award, as well as the 2022 Caterpillar Prize for Children's Poetry. So welcome, Carol. Looking forward to hearing your poem.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My poem's called Bougainvillea. When I think of that year, it's Bougainvillea that comes back. So called because the Frenchman found it on his travels, because it is tropical, outrageous, belonging to another world, more flamboyant, joy-filled, extravagant than ours. But also because I can still see it spilling those red, papery flowers over the porch of that villa in Portugal, where days were spent sunbathing in a garden, dropping into a pool when the heat was too much. I was swimming towards you at the deep end that summer, and surely the flowers could not be real. Only a child could imagine that colour. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol. I absolutely love the last line there. It sort of really gripped me. If I could ask everyone maybe to unmute for a moment and we can clap our first 4 poets before handing over to Mary to introduce the next section of poets. Thank you, everyone.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Alex, for your introduction and the first 4 poets for your fabulous poems. That's Chris Spencer, Deb Catesby, Nia Broomhall and Carol Bromley. They were gorgeous to hear. And thank you to our outgoing guest editor, Alexandra Corin-Tachibana. So now we're back on mute. It's time for our next batch of poems and poets. First up, we have Dylan Jacks. Dylan is a queer disabled writer living in Sussex, working on their first collection. They're published in print and online, including Poetry Wales and Ink, Sweat and Tears. Dylan is a winner of the Rebecca Swift Writing Prize 2022, and they came second in this year's Brighton and Hove Poetry Competition. And I can't wait to hear your poem, Dylan.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you for inviting me here. This is called Colour Fast. My mother is the colour of builder's tea, of wet grass that hasn't yet had time to thirst for more rain. My mother is the colour of lucky coal brought in by a stranger on New Year's Eve. She carries 3 droplets of ocean, the colour of an early June evening under the skin on her wrist. My father is the colour of strong coffee, a shot, bitter, drunk at the bar as it should be. My father is the colour of marble church floors, echoing with footsteps of believers heading for the altar. He is monochrome lights on a tree felled from a real forest, roots cut loose. My brother was electric, purple and bright thumping in his chest, mad green under his fingernails. My brother was blue as a hot summer's day, the one we ran through before we had bodies, before they were stained. My brother was buried in a red blazer, neither his favourite colour nor his favourite coat.
It's just fabulous, Dylan, and so moving. Thank you very much. And so following this, we've got Aoife Mannix. Now, Aoife is the author of a novel, 4 collections of poetry, 2 pamphlets and 6 libretti. She's worked as a script editor for the BBC, as well as for Channel 4 and the Royal Court Theatre. She has a PhD in creative writing from Goldsmiths, University of London. And I'm looking forward to hearing and seeing your poetry, Aoife.
Thanks very much. Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant to be in this amazing book. My one is inspired by a painting. So I thought I would show you the painting, which is by Jack B. Yeats, the Irish painter. And it's called after the name of the song. It's a traveller woman singing a song called Had I the Wings of a Swallow. And this is Had I the Wings. Swallows swell in the throat of a traveller girl, her eyes closed to the rolling fields with their caravan green lit by the dash of clouds, the small squares of a ghost train where a man in a fedora paints the stage enclosed by the rattling roof of small wheels turning. She sings of black sheep, the grief of a woman cast out upon the roads, her child stolen, the old gypsy curse to become a swan lost at sea, homesickness humming in her bones. How for a few pennies in a seashell, she will take you 1,000 miles across the ocean. The carriage on fire with the fiddler's lament. How this is the year he discovered colour as the new frontier, light itself a bow across the strings, feathers in air. The crackle of the seat's plumage, how she does not sing for him or anyone, but leaps between the stops, music on the wing, how to catch that low evening sun in the colour of her coat, the last train out of Dublin, a theatre of orange where all is fleeting glimpses, invisible passengers, a freedom far beyond this island of dirty laundry with its silent prisons, where the sorrow of skin on skin is buried passion in a black bag slung onto the rack of sin. No wonder they went mad. Only the lyrics hold the mirage of being welcomed back into a small town where she has been branded beggar, whore, filthy tinker. Only the painter hears her dignity, how she rides the railroad, ticketless as a nightingale, a tune so old it's wild with the burning hues of dusk, the swirl of his brush, her journey's end. Thank you.
Oh, that's gorgeous. Ticketless as a nightingale, gorgeous. Thank you so much, Aoife. And now we're going to hear from Benedict Newbury. Now, Benedict's poems have appeared in Ambit, Magma, The North, Finished Creatures, Borderlands, Other Poetry, and The Morning Star. He's a Magma board member and was its production manager from 2017 to 2020, and he's lead editor for Magma 74. He was awarded 3 metal residences. I'm not sure what metal residences are, but it sounds really big because it's in capital letters. And he makes poetry films. The Royal Oak was commissioned for Channel 4's Random Acts, which is a fabulous series. So let's hear Benedict's poem now.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for including me in this issue as well, which I think is ace. Really enjoyed reading it. My poem's called Winchcombe, August 2020. That afternoon the sunshine baked all the colour from the scene. The Hercules appeared, 100 feet above the street. The 4 propeller engines placed it 50 years ago on a painted plate in a children's picture book. Cars had vanished. The road was empty. The road was wider. The pubs were closed. The little town, stunned by the heat from another country, the surprise of the plane.
That's wonderful, wonderful poem. Thank you.
Thank you.
So finally, in my section, I've got Fiona Larkin, and she's going to be reading her gorgeous poem. Her collection, her debut collection, Rope of Sand, was published by Pin Drop Press just recently. I think it was last week or the week before. Got it here. It's certainly worth reading. It's got fabulous things in it. And her pamphlets are Vital Capacity from Broken Sleep 2022 and A Dovetail of Breath, Rack Press 2020. She was highly commended in the Forward Prizes, and she manages innovative projects with corrupted poetry. So looking forward to hearing you, Fiona.
Thank you so much, Mary. And it's such a privilege to be part of this really, really beautiful collection. So expansive. Thank you. Pentimenti. Marks of repentance float to the surface through layered oils. Ochre and ultramarine, thinning, dulled. An original outline returns as a second coming, emerging like the faith which doubt erased, or the shape of a love, whitewashed out, in a deliberate act, forgetting. A gesture transpires. Stained by what's gone, the present moment blears your bright denials.
Wonderful. Thank you, Fiona. It's so good to hear all these poems in the poets' voices. Now, please, could you all just briefly unmute and applaud Fiona Larkin, Benedict Newbury, Aoife Mannix, and Dylan Jacks for their fabulous poems. And then I'll hand over to Roger.
Thanks, Mary. And what an excellent set of poems we've had so far. And there are more to come. So I'd like to introduce the first of my 3 poets, which is Julie Runacres. Julie's recently retired and based in Leicestershire, taught English literature and creative writing at schools in Oxford and West London, and was longlisted in the 2022 National Poetry Competition. Her poems have appeared in journals across the UK and the US, and she's a member of the Crocodile Collective. And because this one relies on colour, we'll screen share the poem for you as well. Over to you, Julie.
Thank you very much, Roger, and also to Mary and Alex. I'm thrilled to be part of this beautiful anthology. And thank you for screen sharing, because there is a visual element to mine. 2019 Pantone, 16/15/46, living coral. An animating and life-affirming coral hue with a golden undertone that energizes and enlightens with a softer edge. Data from nearby drilling projects suggests the Great Barrier Reef is a geological infant. The Cathédrale Notre-Dame de Paris is distinguished by its size, antiquity, and architectural interest. Once upon a time, there was a city so dazzling and kaleidoscopic, so braided and water-rimmed, that it was compared to a single living body. Pointed arches and flying buttresses allowed the walls to be soaring and thin. It clustered around a glimmering emerald spine, opened into radiant iris-colored avenues which tourists crossed oceans to see. In the tall light, people felt the presence of God. Then, all at once, a kind of invisible wildfire overran the city. The fire raging through the oak timbers got so hot, almost certainly more than 760 degrees Celsius, that it ate into the adjacent limestone walls and into the tops of some vaults. It consumed its avenues and neighborhoods, swallowed its canyons and branches. 3D printed interlocking units with a porcelain coating may attract baby coral polyps. If we rework it the way it was worked, in the same manner and with the same materials, the message can be transmitted, Francois Calam, ethnologist, says. You'll be able to feel it. 2020 Pantone, 1546, classic blue. An expansive presence, classic blue is evocative of the vast and infinite evening sky, opening a world of possibilities. January 23, doomsday clock moves to 100 seconds to midnight. Scientists cite two simultaneous existential dangers, nuclear war and climate change, compounded by a threat multiplier, cyber-enabled information warfare, undercutting humanity's capacity to respond. December 31, global deaths from novel coronavirus, 1,976,810, rising. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jill, and fascinating companions with the poetry and the Pantone squares. So my next poet is Patrick Agnew. Patrick lives just outside Lismore in Waterford, Ireland. He completed a full-time MA in creative writing with the Department of English in UCC in 2020 and spends his spare time writing, reading, listening, cycling, and presumably not this time of the year, working away in the garden. Over to you, Patrick.
Thank you very much. This is a little poem based on a very vivid dream, which is why the poem jumps around a little bit in the way dreams do, called The Colours of Jesus. The colours of Jesus. Jesus can walk on anything, on stones, over grit and brown earth. He can glide on the heavenly welcome of skies, skim lightly over blue waters in new Birkenstocks and garments the colours of butter. He slipped into my nightmare last night without asking, rattled over brittle ridges of baked sand in his old Ford Cortina, bounced dust off clay-covered pipelines, past flares of orange from towers of oil, like he was speeding through scenes from a movie about black gold. He paused when he saw me. I think he wanted to lend a helping hand as I bent under the redness of a half-dark sky, the shade you might see on a fading rose before it gives up. I was hanging my head, cradling a plastic bag given to me by a bearded stranger. It dripped scarlet that congealed to a flaky black on the surface of desert sands. The robes of Jesus glowed yellow like a cactus flower after rain. He motioned to me to get on over there, like we were old friends, catching up to stroll into the flood that lay between us like a mirage. And I walked out into that ocean, and I gave it all up. The sticky bag, the black dog, my white lies. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. And our last poet, Laura Frankina. Laura lives in London. Her poems have appeared in publications such as Magma, Oxford Poetry, Poetry News, and were longlisted for the 2021, 2022, and 2023 Abachi Prizes. So over to you, Laura.
Thank you. My poem is Kindled. My daughter's near black hair is lit with undertones of fire. When I tuck a strand behind her ear, she shrugs me off, rakes her fingers through embers.
Thanks very much, Laura. And shall we unmute and applaud Julie, Patrick, and Laura? So now I'm going to hand back to Mary.
For those who are wondering where our third co-editor, Vanessa Lampert, is, she's currently in Australia and was unable to log in for the launch. But I know that she's here in spirit and she'll be looking forward to seeing the recording of it all. Thank you all for your wonderful poems and to Roger and Alex for introducing them. To 12 will carry the theme Elements.
Thanks,
Over
Mary.
to you.
So that's what a great evening of poems, and very colourful set of poems, which is appropriate. So I just like to thank quite a few people. I'd like to thank all the people who submitted to this issue, which were quite a few folk, all the people whose poems got selected. And of course, you've only seen a small selection of the poems tonight. The only way to see the whole thing is to buy a copy, and copies are, we sold out all the copies before the launch, but we've had a print run, so there are still some available, and they're available from Clayhanger Press, whose website is in the chat. I'd like to thank Alexandra for being a delightful guest editor and making our job really easy and selecting such an interesting group of poems. I'd like to also thank the artists who submitted photographs and artwork, which have made this really a superb looking issue, I think, as well as a good read. We've got also, just a reminder, the Alchemy Spoon pamphlet competition, which closed a while ago. And just to say that we'll be announcing the results in a couple of weeks' time for anyone who entered, and they'll be on the website. And again, we had an amazing set of poems, and Chris Hardy, I think, had a very difficult job in going through them and selecting a long list, a short list, and finally down to a winner. So all that will be announced in a couple of weeks' time, and we'll have a launch of the pamphlet when it's out in the new year. But also, because we had so many interesting poems on the long list, we're going to publish an anthology of a poem each from all the people who were longlisted or shortlisted, and that'll come out again next year. So thank you very much for coming. I don't have to wish you a safe journey home because you're already there, but hope to see you again at the launch of the next one, and hopefully see lots and lots of poems from you and lots of new people we don't know for the next issue. Thanks very much, and good night.